So how does food become good medicine? It doesn't become good medicine at the processing plant. That's not where it starts. It starts with the seed. Then the next step is, what kind of soil is that seed put into? The things you've already mentioned. And then, when is it harvested? How is it harvested? Is it harvested at peak nutrition? Is it harvested green? And then we go to the processing. But those first three steps, and it's not only soil, but then what is anything sprayed on it? I mean, are we putting hormones on it? Are we spraying chemicals of pesticides, herbicides, all this other stuff that we don't want to really have on our food? All that is a part of the whole picture.
Welcome to the Real Organic Podcast. I'm Linley Dixon, co-director of the Real Organic Project. We're a grassroots, farmer-led movement with an add-on organic label that distinguishes crops grown in healthy soils and livestock raised on well-managed pasture, all without synthetic fertilizers or toxic chemicals. You just heard from organic grain farmer and author Bob Quinn, who is joining us once again to discuss his passion for growing food as medicine and as a means of healing farmland. Bob is the author, with Liz Carlisle, of one of my favorite books, Grain by Grain, and he'll be discussing his research comparing ancient wheat varieties to modern wheat. Bob also shares a recount of his recent White House meeting with Secretary of Health RFK Jr. and Secretary of Agriculture Brooke Rollins.
Welcome to the Real Organic Podcast, and I am talking with my friend Bob Quinn today. So Bob, this time you're in Montana and I'm in Vermont. But we're going to see each other in just about 2.5 weeks at Churchtown, so that'll be great. But thanks. I wanted to talk about some of the things that we've talked about privately, and so that we share some of this with other people. And one of the things that you've been working on kind of big time that is important, and it's interesting, and it's confusing, and that is food is medicine. Now, this idea is as old as medicine itself, right? Back to Hippocrates and let food be thy medicine and medicine be thy food. And I think there's two things in that, and this can be confusing. One is that the food that you eat will make you a lot healthier. And the other is the idea that maybe there's certain things you can eat if you are sick that will help you get healthier. Mm-hmm. Those are two fairly different ways of looking at it. So tell me about how you got into food as medicine, and let's talk about some basic things that are exciting to you.
All right, well, that'd be great. And first of all, thanks for inviting me. I'm anxious to have you come visit us in Montana, but this is as close as it gets this time, and it's fun to be with you, Dave, anytime. So in any circumstance. So thanks again. But I didn't start out with this idea as food as medicine at all. I didn't, as we talked earlier, I didn't even start out with organic as an idea in my youth or my studies or anything. I just evolved into that by the people I met and by the experiences I had in trying it. And the actual food as medicine part didn't really dawn on me until we started comparing ancient wheat, which we market under one wheat grow, market under the name of Kamut, and modern wheat, and finding people told me they felt better when they ate this ancient wheat. Most of those people who said they felt better were those that had health challenges. A lot of other people just say, oh, well, it tastes fine, but they don't notice anything because they're not bothered by wheat. But 20% of the people in this country are bothered by wheat. That's huge. That's 1/5 of the whole population has some kind of trouble. And most of those had no trouble, and several had not only no trouble, but their health improved. And so we started doing research in Italy and comparing organic, ancient wheat, and organic modern wheat. So we didn't want to have another unknown in the mix, being organic and non-organic. I think there's also a big difference there. But we wanted to compare just the grain, the seed source.
Looking at the variety. Looking at the variety. Right. Yeah.
Right. Without comparing any other factors. So everything we try to keep exactly the same type of manufacturing. We told people not to eat any wheat product other than what we gave them. They didn't know what they were eating. Actually, they had bread and pasta and flour. They can make whatever they wanted out of wheat. They knew it was wheat, of course, but they didn't know the nature of the project, and they didn't know if they were eating modern or ancient or even that subject. So these are human clinical trials based on people with chronic disease, heart disease, diabetes, irritable bowel syndrome, all kinds of different diseases. This is over probably 10, 15-year time frame. We published 37 peer-reviewed journal articles as a result of this now. And the results were so consistent, Dave, that the researchers were amazed, actually. And the biggest difference we found that those on a diet of ancient wheat had significantly higher anti-inflammatory properties and indicators in their blood. The inflammation was going down, and we know that inflammation is linked to chronic disease. And so that really got me thinking seriously about what we eat really affects our health. And then harkening back, of course, that you mentioned of Hippocrates. This is not a new idea. It was taught 2,300 years ago. But now it's starting to come around where people are starting to talk about it. And you raise a really interesting question about food as medicine, and wonder if you're healthy already or wonder if you're sick. When you say it that way, food is medicine, well, then it can either be good medicine or bad medicine. Yeah. I mean, you can eat food that makes you sick, and a lot of people are doing that. Diabetes is a perfect example of a disease coming mostly from your diet, also from your activity, but mostly from your diet. Some people are predisposed, so they have a little more opportunity to develop it, but most of that can be controlled by diet. So I told you earlier, we developed now a Regenerative Organic Research, Education, and Health Institute out of about 600 acres in the middle of my farm. And our focus is healing the earth by growing food as medicine. So we want to focus on the health benefits, having nutritious food that helps everybody. You don't have to be sick to eat good food, nor should you be, but it keeps you well, it keeps you strong, it keeps you, for growing kids, it helps with their vitality, everything else. For people who are aging, it helps them maintain their strength and vitality. So I think it's for every good food. So if we look at food being our medicine, I think regenerative organic food is the best medicine. And high nutrition in that, we want to make sure that usually goes together, hand in glove, is what runs that furnace. And we should be focusing on that.
Okay. I have a lot of questions already. So,
okay.
First of all, you
ahead.
ran this trial. I wish you'd actually run a chemical production as a comparison, but okay. You compared organically grown with a new variety with organically grown with an old, historic variety that was bred before. The modern wheat is, of course, bred for all kinds of funny stuff that none of its flavor, none of its health. It's all for yield. It's all for yield.
Yeah,
and it's all for yield in a chemical system. It's not for yield in an organic system. Okay, so here's my first question. You gave people over 10 years, you're giving them these, either the new wheat or the old wheat, all organic. Were you giving them like white flour pasta? Was it being roller milled so that it was a white spaghetti, or are they eating whole wheat spaghetti?
Well, it depends on what. That's a really good question. And I was really hard on the side of whole wheat. But some diseases like irritable bowel syndrome, the researchers were so concerned that the bowel would be irritated by whole grain, particularly the whole grain of modern wheat. And I'll explain why in a second, that they were afraid that they'd have too many drop out. And so they went with, the compromise was what they call in Italy semi-integrale, which is a kind of a halfway point between white flour and whole wheat. We don't really have that in America. We're either white flour or whole wheat. But they have the semi-integrale, which is halfway in between. And that's what we compromised on with some of the experiments. On others, they were whole grain. If there wasn't a situation where it was a gut sensitivity issue. So like for the heart disease, for the diabetes, that was more whole grain stuff for pasta and the bread and what was given them.
Yeah, I mean, an actual whole wheat pasta is pretty different from a white flour pasta, regardless of where it
Well,
comes
it
from.
is.
Yeah.
But in Italy, I tell you what, they are the champions of this stuff. They can make you a whole wheat pasta that is smooth and delicious. It's more delicious in my mind, but it has the texture and the smoothness of their white pasta.
Okay.
And we're fighting a little bit of tradition there because it's like the white flour in America, the white bread in America. White pasta in Italy is like white bread in America. That's what predominates, and that's what people go for. But there's starting to be some manufacturers, small ones usually, more organic and that sort of thing, because they're focusing on nutrition and health, that are doing whole grain. What has happened with the breeding process? In many cases, the bran has been made harder so it can be flaked off closer to the endosperm, so you have more white flour recovered in the milling process, because now the bran is harder, it flakes off easier.
Now, I'm sorry, Bob. You got to slow that down for people who don't know. So,
all right. So
we got wheat berries, and we run them through a mill. Tell me what happens.
So you run them through a mill, a roller mill is the way we're doing it nowadays, and it's flaking off the bran. Well, that bran, when it cracks and breaks away from the kernel, what's left is the white part of the kernel inside. That's the endosperm. That's where the starch is mostly, and some protein. And the millers, I mean, it's not only the farmers who want high yields, the millers want high yields too. Everybody wants, the bakers want high yields. We can talk about that too. But so to get higher yields for the millers, you have a harder bran that flakes off by itself without carrying particles of endosperm, particles of white flour with them that are lost to the process. So that if the miller can get a grain that can flake the bran off easier, then and more separated, easier, or more complete, then his yield is going to go up of white flour as a percent of the whole wheat kernel that he starts with, and that makes him more money. So there's a big interest in that. So the breeders were able to make, in many cases, the bran harder. But then when you add that hard bran back to the white flour to make whole wheat flour, and grind, even if you grind it up, if you don't really pulverize it, it's full of little shards because it's brittle and hard. And it's much harder than the old wheats, which are softer. The bran is softer, and it doesn't irritate the bowels. It doesn't irritate your gut system the way the sharper bran particles can irritate it in modern wheat. Not for everybody, but for those that are sensitive, it's another factor that's creating a problem with them.
Yeah.
So does that make sense? I understand.
We're getting there. We're getting there. This is still complicated because people go to the store and they buy whole wheat flour. They buy whole wheat bread. They buy whole wheat flour, and guess what? It's not whole wheat. It's not.
Well, yeah.
Right?
Because the way it's labeled, the labeling laws in America do not require you to put back everything that was starting with the kernel that goes into the flour mill.
That's right.
You only have to put back a certain portion, and I couldn't tell you what that percent is, but it's not 100%.
Right.
So even though they can say it's whole wheat when it's really not whole wheat, but they put in a portion back. Many times they don't even put in any of the germ back in because they're afraid that it might go rancid. But they'll put in a little bran, and they'll pulverize that up and make it look, and you can see the color is there. It's colored a little bit.
No, it looks like whole wheat. No.
Yeah.
So tell me about the germ. Tell me about the germ, because I people don't understand. I didn't understand that when you go and buy whole wheat flour in a store and on the shelf, it's not whole wheat because they took out the germ, because the germ will break down. And so
in most cases.
So you get.
Go ahead. So
no,
what's your
well,
question
I'm
about
just,
that?
I didn't understand that it's actually that once you mill flour, it's very perishable. It's not like a wheat berry, which is
the whole wheat. You mean the whole wheat flour?
Yes.
Excuse
me. Yes, the whole wheat. Yeah.
It oxidizes. Yes, and that's why. So here's the real secret, and we're just starting to talk about this now, David. I don't think you and I have ever talked about this. This is something that just came full circle to me just a few months ago, actually. I ran into a lady in Georgia who is really big on fresh milled flour. And I never really thought about it, because when I make Kamut sourdough pancakes at least once or twice a week, I mill the flour fresh. And when I make my cracked cereal for Kamut hot cereal, I crack it fresh. I crack it and then I boil it 10 minutes and it's ready to eat. I never let it sit on the shelf. And I never thought about that. But she's saying that is a huge, huge difference. And I've been trying to work now with the food science department at Montana State University and actually try to do some analysis of fresh ground whole wheat flour compared to flour that's sitting on the shelf at room temperature for days or weeks or months or several months or a year, and then compare that with maybe something in the refrigerator or the freezer, and just see what's going on. Because this lady in Georgia is saying that there's a huge loss of very important nutrients that, and this isn't an organic question, a non-organic question. This is a processing question that relates to the freshness and the nutrition of what you're starting with. You're starting with a whole kernel. It's a package. It's a package it's not open, it's preserved. But when you open that package, you need to eat that ASAP, as soon as possible, because some of the nutrition in that begins to break down and is oxidized. It combines with oxygen and destroys the integrity and reduces the nutrition. Now, it's not all, Dave. These are important components, but they're not the majority, of course. But they are important things that we are losing that we could add to our health if we ate closer to the mill, I guess we say it that way.
Well, I'm like
to have people eat close to the field, right? So
I'm like you, Bob. I got my own mill, and
yes,
I just milled some flour this morning. I'm making bread right now, and
oh, good.
That's how I do it. And it's interesting. People say, "Well, it's not a big deal," but the question is it a big deal?
I think it is.
In the old days, bread was the staff of life, right? All of Europe lived off bread, and now a third of America gets sick by eating bread.
Yeah, it's the greatest paradox you can imagine, right?
Yeah.
The thing that should make you healthy is actually making you sick.
That's right. And there's one thing I will disagree with you about. You say, well, it's not about organic. I know what you mean. I understand it's not about whether the grain was grown organically, but for me, real organic is about the whole system, and it is about
that's right. Okay,
the wholeness of the food. So right. I have to disagree with Gene Kahn about the organic Twinkie. I don't think so.
Yes, okay. What does Gene Kahn want, an organic Twinkie? Is that what you're
Well,
saying?
Gene and Joan Gussow had a famous conversation back in the day on the NOSB. You were probably around for that. And Gene was saying, he famously said, organic is not your mother. If you want to put organic ingredients into a Twinkie and call it an organic Twinkie, that's okay with me.
Yeah.
And Joan said, no, that's not organic anymore. You can't make an organic Twinkie. Yeah. What do you think?
Unfortunately, I think, I'm agreeing with you. I would never go that way. And we've talked about this before. My greatest fear for organic is industrialization of organic, and that is the height of industrialization. So you can take the best of what farmers have done, great organic farmers, and then you can completely adulterate that with ultra processing that still is classified as organic, and it's not fit to eat. I mean, really, as far as health goes, because there's nothing left that's nutritious there. And and we talked about this before, there's the difference between the spirit of organic, in my mind, and the letter of the law of organic. The letter of the law, this way you're dealing with it right now, kind of allows that sort of thing. But the spirit of organic, the thing that was put together in the first place by the pioneers of organic in America, throughout the world, in America and Europe particularly, the ones we worked with, that was not the intention. The intention was what you're talking about, to follow it all the way through. The spirit of organic goes clear to your plate on the table. That's in my mind. And so you can have a legally labeled organic Twinkie, but that's not the spirit of that won't give you health. And that's not the spirit of organic that I was introduced to when I was first introduced to it.
Yeah, me too. It was always much bigger than that. It was much bigger than a list of inputs. We could go there a long time, Bob, but I want to go back because I think it's so important what you did. So you've run years of trials. These were mostly done in Italy?
Yes, when we first started, I couldn't find anybody in America that wanted to work with me because the thought in America was, what can possibly be wrong with our wheat? We're the greatest, most powerful, wonderful, smartest country in the whole world. There can't be anything wrong with our wheat. And several researchers, one particularly kind of summed it up for me when he said to me, well, he says, if I would do the kind of research you're asking for, he said, I'd be wasting my time and your money. And I said, okay, well, that paints a picture. So they didn't believe in it. They thought that a lot of people who had trouble eating wheat, it was all in their head, and it wasn't a real problem. And so I didn't really want to work with those kind of guys, reluctantly. But when I went to Italy, if an Italian has problem eating pasta, they weren't ready to run down the street and buy wheat-free, gluten-free. They wanted to know what was the matter with what the pasta or them or a combination, and how to fix it. And so I found folks at the University of Bologna, which is 1,000 years old. They've got a little history there. And University of Florence, which is where they're one of their most famous and well organized and put together hospital research laboratories are. And they were very interested in my question. And so we formed kind of a partnership there, and that's where we did the 10 or 15 years of research with those guys. They were very, very interested in it. They were quite amazed at what they saw, because they thought they might see something, but they were amazed at the degree of the evidence and the consistency that we saw.
So let's go to the results now. Consistently, what were they seeing?
So every single group, everybody in the group responded the same. We have these big thousands of people that are in these drug groups, and they look at really teeny tiny little differences, and they say, okay, this is, and they make all these conclusions. We had very small groups, but we had they were divided into two, and one would eat ancient grain, one eat modern wheat. They didn't know what it was, so it was a blind study. And in most cases, the professors, the scientists didn't know either, so it was double blind actually. And they would eat those for 6 weeks, and then we'd do the blood draws and measure everything, and then they'd have a 6-week crossover where they ate whatever they wanted. Then they started over eating the other diet. So you had the same person eating both diets and see how they responded. And in every single case, there wasn't anybody that had an opposite reaction. So in every single case with the ancient wheat, the inflammation properties were reduced. There was less inflammation. There was more antioxidant capacity. For diabetes, there was less the sugar. Insulin levels were down. Insulin resistance was down. Blood sugar was down with the ancient wheat. In all cases, magnesium and zinc in the blood were up. Things that were all important. So they were very consistent on that. Even though the degree was varied, of course, between people, the direction they were going was not varied. And that's pretty unusual to have that clear cut of a difference. So we were really pretty excited about that.
Yeah.
Although it was difficult though to publish the first one, because no one had talked about this before. This had never been described before. And we had a little bit of a challenge getting the first paper published because people didn't believe it, and because they'd never heard of it. And so that's kind of the challenge. That's the danger of being too far out ahead of the pack, the danger of the pioneer. They think you're crazy. And so I've been, people thought me crazy for years, so it's nothing new for me. But after a while, after several publications, then we get remarks back, well, here's another in the series, and it was being accepted then. And then other labs around the world were also duplicating some things that we were doing and finding similar results. So it wasn't just us. And people say, well, if you're paying for their own research, it's not valuable or it's not credible. But these were all double-blind studies. We had no way to influence the outcomes. There were some diseases that was more affected than others. We had some that didn't really show very much, but there were none that showed the opposite effects for one way for the ancient compared to the modern, as far as a complete difference that way.
Yeah. When you talk about people thinking you were crazy, it reminded me of Ignaz Semmelweis, the guy who first got this idea of washing his hands before he helped deliver a baby. He was, a doctor, worked in a hospital, and he discovered that their outcomes were vastly better if the doctors washed their hands.
Huh.
And when he tried to convince the world of that, they said he was crazy. They
Yeah.
drove him out of
Yeah.
medicine. I mean, he had a terrible
Yeah.
life. So you're
Sure.
right. It can be very dangerous to be the first. So there were significant changes in 6 weeks.
Yes.
That's pretty quick
So the
recovery.
test was between 6 and 8 weeks. Some tests were 8, some were 6, but that was the time range. And then there was the same amount of time of the washout, and then the crossover, and it was repeated.
Okay. So let me ask a question here.
Okay.
If you tested the wheat as opposed to testing the human and the effect, I'm just really curious, because what I have seen looking at nutritional testing, and Joan was so good about nutritionism and the complete failure of it, and of course Michael Pollan wrote the brilliant book using Joan's ideas and developing them about this cult of nutritionism, where people felt like, oh, it's the vitamin D. So if we synthesize vitamin D and put it in the wheat, now we're going to solve the problem and everyone's going to be healthy, but it just doesn't work. So my question to you is, did you look at that of like, I wonder what the difference is in the wheat, or were you really focused on what's the difference on the person who's eating the two wheats?
That's really a good question. And that's what we did first, actually, is look at chemically what's in the wheat. And so the good and the bad and ugly part of that story is that was a mixed bag, and it wasn't clear cut. There wasn't one thing we could point to and say, well, this is higher, and this is the reason why everybody is doing better. There wasn't. In fact, we kind of got discounted and poo-pooed because some of the research on, I forgot what chemicals they were, but indicators of wheat sensitivity, well, the kamut had it, just like the modern wheat. And they said, well, it's no different. It's no different. But the people who were eating it felt a difference. So what do you say? My answer to that is, well, we're not looking at the right thing. And maybe it's a synergistic relationship between several components that are making the difference. So we don't really know. That is another level of nutrition we haven't got to yet, in my opinion. And I was trained as a biochemist, so I'm familiar with all these kinds of tests and know how much homage they're paid in some cases. And yet there's more to it, Dave. There's more to it than just a presence or absence of a chosen nutritional compound. And we don't really understand the entire mode of action. But in some of our research, we could see changes in nuclear activity in the nucleus, so that the messenger DNA, which codes for different proteins and whatnot, that was being changed and altered. We could measure it. So things were happening at the nuclear level in the cells that was changing the metabolism that was going on in your body. That's huge. I mean, that's and we don't know what was causing that, what particular element or molecule or anything. So those are some of the things for research in the future I think could really help our understanding of what to look for and how to understand nutrition.
Yeah, this is so important, Bob. And that's what I've seen when I've looked at serious attempts to look at the nutritional differences between good soil-grown food and hydroponic and chemical. And it's like, it looks like there's very little difference. And yet it's so obvious to your tongue that there's a big difference.
Yes. Okay. So we have been given two great gifts for sensitivity and analysis. We don't need all these fancy millions of dollars of instruments. We have this and we have this. And if it has a nice aroma and a really good flavor, then you can be almost guaranteed, it's not 100%, there's hardly anything 100%, but very, very high correlation between good taste and good nutrition and nice aromas and good nutrition. So if something tastes good and has a nice pleasing aroma, it probably is good for you. And that really, you've hit on it really well. And everybody can do that at the food counter, at the grocery store, and at the restaurant. I mean, you can tell I know your business is tomatoes. That's a really good example. The flavor in tomatoes is like black and white. I mean, we have tomatoes in our store that came from I don't know how many thousands of miles away in the wintertime, or from a hothouse somewhere, that was all hydroponic, and they look beautiful. And I think the best use for those is to take a picture and put it on your wall, because that's the best use for it. Because to eat them, they're just not satisfying, and they're terrible. And if you have tomatoes that are really tasty and satisfying, then you can pretty much be assured that not only they're good for you, but they were grown in a way that produce those compounds that are really flavorful and good for you.
Yeah, I know. I've thought we should start something like CARE, which used to drop packages of food to people who were really hungry, and I thought maybe I could drop some packages of tomatoes in Montana sometimes of the year when you all are starving for them. Okay, so this is also important. I think we're getting down. I know what I wanted to say. Unfortunately, the tongue and the nose are also being fooled now, because, man, they've got some good chemists working on this.
Yes, yes, you can artificially mimic stuff, and you're right. You're right about that. And I should have qualified what I said by fresh food and whole food. Otherwise, if it's processed food, that can be mimicked, and you can't tell the difference, or it's overshadowed with sugar or salt or whatever, nice spices or whatever.
So
if you start with
the whole flavoring industry, they're good at it, And
of course, and that's yeah.
I think that there's a thing that I do believe that educated palates can tell the difference, right? I think that somebody can go, well, yeah, it creates craving, but actually I don't think it's good. And I think that you can learn that. I there's junk food, and I know if I ate it, I would want to eat more, but I also taste it and I go, this doesn't taste good. If I sit there with it, it doesn't make me feel good. That you can learn to pay attention. But yeah.
But if you don't have anything to compare it with, Dave, it's really easy for those people who are stuck on that merry-go-round to not know the difference, not know any difference, because they've never tasted anything. They've never had it fresh, or the kind of flavor it should have.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. When I got married, we didn't invite anybody to our wedding, but we had a little party a month or so later, and we invited a family, and my wife's family, they're all from New York City. And they came up, and they just never had vegetables like that. They were raving about the corn, and the corn was very good, but they just never had it, and so they didn't have anything to compare it to. They were like, "How come we didn't know about this?" Now it's different. Now you can go to the farmers market in New York, and you can get good food. But back then, the only choice was the stores, the bodegas, or the supermarkets.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So, is there more to be said? Because I got other places to go. But is there more to be said about your work here with this? What's come out of it now that you've had a number of papers published? And I just want to remind people, you're a good old boy from Montana, but you also got a PhD, and so you wear two hats. I know you like to wear that hat.
Yeah. I do have a different hat too, or several different ones.
So do you where are you going to go with this project next?
Well, one of the things that has really intrigued me with the whole food as medicine movement is to what I see a lot, Dave, that they leave out the farm component. And so you can't leave out the farm component, because that's where it starts. And so I've taken about 600 acres out of the middle of my farm and created a Regenerative Organic Research, Education, and Health Institute. And our whole focus is healing the earth by growing food as medicine. And that's what we want to focus on. So we're focusing not on high yields, although yields are important. We don't take something you can't make money with, of course, but we don't sacrifice nutrition for high yields. If we have something that has the best taste, the best nutrition, and not quite a good a yield, that's what we go with. And we're trying to figure out how to help farmers be more successful as organic farmers, how to convert how to get off the chemical treadmill. You know, most 75% of my neighbors that I had when I was in high school, Dave, of course, that was a few years back now, but they're gone. And they're gone because they went broke. They went broke because of the modern chemical, industrial, agricultural system that requires a lot of money up front for inputs and then very little money in return for what you grow and what you haul into the elevator. I mean, you're talking about grain farmers now in my neighborhood. That's what most of it. And most of those guys are gone. And the big chemical companies, they don't care about that because the ones that are left are still sending them big checks. And so somebody is still paying out. But I think it's a real loss because when they go, then the communities are little big. Community of Big Sandy has declined from 1,000 when I was in high school in the 60s to 600 now. Half of Main Street is boarded up. I can't say that that you can call that progress. And we have such pollutions now. We've got rain, glyphosate in our rain. We have people can't drink. Most children are not allowed to drink from the well water of Iowa. We have cancer rates in rural America that's higher than anywhere else. We have dead zones in the Gulf of Mexico, size New Jersey. How big does it have to get before we think maybe we're going the wrong direction? So those are the kinds of the prices. The high. I always like to talk about what I've just been talking about is the high cost of cheap food. So the focus is on cheap food, but it's a mirage. There's no such thing as cheap food. There's only cheap checkouts at the food counter at the grocery store in the major supermarkets. All the rest of the costs are paid by someone else in different periods of time. Then the biggest cost is paid by the people who now are doctoring some kind of health malady because of this cheap food. Right now, the CDC just announced a few days ago that we've gone from 60% to 76% of our entire population has at least one chronic disease. That's over 3/4, Dave, of the whole country. So how bad does that have to get before we start really taking this serious? This is a crisis, I think, that not many people want to talk about or acknowledge even. But we have the answer. The organic farmers of America have the beginning of the answer to this. It starts with how we grow our food. It continues on in the processing and how we process it. We talked already about that. But it starts with good seed. That was my conclusion with the ancient wheat, modern wheat. It's not, you can have the best soil and the best organic system in the world. If you put in crappy seed or GMO stuff that's going to produce questionable results for nutrition, you've lost half of what you could have gained right there. So it has to all go together. And you were mentioning this in the beginning too, that there's a big continuum. It's just not a little set of rules for this particular part of the program. It's the whole process. And you have to get from the good soil to harvesting at peak nutrition, not green. We can't harvest things green and expect the nutrition to be there and then ship it all around the world. You can't process it to death and add all the goodies so it still tastes good, but there's nothing there. Those are the things that you have to finish the food, preserving what the farmers have worked so hard to put in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely, Bob. Dan Barber and Hugh Kent have been working together, and Lisa Kent have been working together. They did a really interesting taste test on Hugh's blueberries and compared them to, chemical berries and to allegedly organic berries from Mexico and Chile, not Chile, Peru, and, probably hydroponic. And they did taste tests, and they were tested for pesticides. Hugh's going to tell that story at Churchtown. I think you're in another breakout, so you won't get to hear it, but you'll hear about it. It was.
Well, you're taping it. You're taping it, aren't you? Taping the message.
We're going to tape it. We're going to tape it. Yeah, we'll get it out. We'll get it out.
Okay, good.
One thing that Dan said, I interviewed him a couple months ago, and he's always interesting. And he said, he does row 7 seed, and he said, I really thought the genetics was it, that we just need to get our genetics right, just what you're talking about with Kamut and the heritage grains. And he said, but then I did a taste comparison of Hughes blueberries with the same variety grown in a chemical place close by. And he said there was no comparison.
Yeah.
And he said, so I have to go back to my roots, which is to say how they were grown is critically important. And he believes that taste reflects the health-giving qualities for that food. All right, so you went to there is now a movement. Food is medicine. It's getting millions of dollars, God bless them, to try and get America off of junk food. And I'd say, I've talked to a few of them, and they're all good people, and they want good things. And their main focus, as far as I can see, is to get America off its junk food habit because it's killing us. And I agree, and I support that. But they seem almost childishly naive or indifferent to how the food is grown.
Yeah.
A carrot is not a carrot. That is just the truth, And I'll bet that a kernel of wheat is not a kernel of wheat. There's a lot of variation in there about how it was grown, how the soil is, all of that, and the varieties too. All of that, everything that happens before the swallow, as Joan Gussow would say.
Sure. How it's milled and when it was milled. We'd already talked about that.
That's right. So you've had somewhat similar experiences, I think. I'll let you speak for yourself, but I know you went to a gathering at Tufts, a pretty prestigious group, and you said there were 2 farmers in the room for 150 people or something. Talk about that. What did you discover?
Well, it was like you said. I mean, I'm thrilled to death about the level of interest and focus on food as medicine, but I was a little discouraged about the lack of inclusion of how we start out with creating that. So we think that if food is medicine, all right, I agree with that. But organic food is the best medicine, and regenerative organic food. I mean, if it's soil from good, healthy soil, that's the best medicine. And we put together kind of a chart, Dave, that starts with that. How does food become good medicine? It doesn't become good medicine at the processing plant. That's not where it starts. It starts with the seed. Then the next step is what kind of soil is that seed put into? The things you've already mentioned. And then when is it harvested? How is it harvested? Is it harvested at peak nutrition? Is it harvested green? And then we go to the processing. But those first 3 steps, and it's not only soil, but then what is anything sprayed on it? I mean, are we putting hormones on it? Are we spraying chemicals of pesticides, herbicides, all this other stuff that we don't want to really have on our food? All that is a part of the whole picture. And you can look at one little piece and say, okay, we're not going to eat Twinkies. We don't care if they're organic or not. For example, we talked about that. Well, that's ignoring a whole nother part of the question, which you brought up so well. Well, a Twinkie isn't really a nutritional food anyway. So why do we even have that discussion? That should be part of the junk food that we discourage. And it's a big part of that. I was surprised that the main folks who were there were like the insurance people, the life insurance, the health insurance, Kaiser Hospital, and I'm thrilled that they're there and working at least on the junk food aspect. But I would love to be able to introduce what we understand is the beginning of that story of how food becomes just not what makes it bad, but what makes it good, Dave. I think you got 2 things. You got food that's created or grown in ways that really make it good. And then you have ways of growing it that don't end with that same result. And then you go to the next step, which is the processors, and they have their own set of things that can happen to they either preserve that nutrition or lose that nutrition or add bad things to it or take good things out. So those are the different things I see happening at their end. But you have to start with something that's good, and that comes from agriculture, and that comes from farmers. And I would really appreciate having a little more of a stage for that, and also research coming out of USDA and the government to support that. I don't hear very much talk about that, and that's really critical. There's really a lot of questions that could help that should be answered that would help people feel more comfortable as farmers converting to organic, because right now a lot of them are afraid to start, even though we have successful ones in every state of the union now that they can look to. There's still the majority are been so brainwash is kind of hard, but so touted by hour after hour of commercials and in public school system of the chemical way is the only way to go, because that's the future of feeding the world, and they're afraid. They haven't heard the other side, and they haven't seen it up front, and that's what needs to happen. And we need to solve some. For us in Montana, we have some perennial weed problems that we could really use some research money to help solve. I'm sure that they can be managed, but without research, it's hard to guess the best way to do that.
That's right. There's a lot of research going on. It's all on the wrong things, you know.
There's a lot of money being spent.
There's a lot of money being spent on research. You know what? Yeah. You're probably one of the people who told me, but whatever, organic is whatever 7% of the groceries sold in America.
Yeah.
What percent of the USDA's research budget is spent on organic?
Yeah, just over 1. And that's I think that's a pitch I've been trying to make every time I go to Washington and talk to those guys. I said, at least let's research by definition should be looking at the future. That's why we do it. I mean, to understand the present so we can prepare better for the future. And if the future, the biggest growth in American agriculture right now is organic, and the biggest growth in food is organic. It's still small. It's less than 10%, but the rate of growth, current rate of growth, and you and I have been around for most of this. The last 35 years, we've gone from near zero to 6%. I mean, we were the laughing stock 35 years ago. I mean, this is ridiculous that anybody should think of such a thing, replacing chemical agriculture. But now we see so much evidence of trouble. I think we should hold the torch really as high as we can and say, here is a standard you can come to, a solution that you can put your money on if you research or any other thing, and have results. Because now at the current rate of growth, Dave, in another 35 years, you and I are going to be hard pushed to be in there 35 years here, but somebody will be here 35 years.
We hope.
So why can't our children and grandchildren have the benefit of another 35 years at the current rate of growth of organic? It will go from 6 to 100%. That should be our vision. That can be our goal. And why not? Why not reverse this terrible health crisis we have? Think of what could be, all the good that could be done with all the money spent on health right now if it were redirected. We could pay a little more for our food so the farmers would have a decent return for what they're out in the hot sun sweating over. What's the matter with that idea? Wasn't that fair? Isn't that equitable? We can have that. And yet we would still be saving a lot of money compared to what we're spending now on healthcare.
Yeah, I'm all with you, Bob. That's well said. It's so clear and obvious, and yet it's not easy, is it? So
no.
I wanted.
We are the minority. We're the minority, and we're not. And the money is. We're in the minority of the money too. The big money is not where we are. It's where the chemical guys are, and the farmer, big pharma, the pharmaceutical guys.
I'm not absolutely certain we're the minority, but we're certainly the minority of the money. We're the minority of the influence. All the things we're talking about is just health for people, everybody.
I know. I think
even
we're
the people
getting more
who hate what we do.
We're getting more appreciation. Yeah, I think we're getting more. Not sympathy is not the right word, but more acknowledged and understood. Maybe that's the right word. I think we need to be understood better. We need to tell our story better or get it out better or more. And I really appreciate what you do and getting the story out, because people have to be informed in order to make good decisions.
Yeah.
If their only source of information is coming from Bayer and the former Monsanto folks, they're not going to be looking for better solutions. That's all.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's talk about one of your efforts to get the word out and educate. You're doing a lot with Quinn Institute. I just love that for you, 600 acres is, I carved off a little piece of the farm. For me, 600 acres is about 300 times my farm.
Yeah.
Yeah, but okay.
You got something I don't have, Dave. You got rain.
Yeah.
When you don't have rain, you need a little more territory to grow up. We can only grow one crop every 2 years.
That's right.
I mean, for example. So
Yeah.
we want to put things in perspective. It's an average size in Montana is 2,500 acres. That's our average size.
Yeah.
Well, and we're having a hard time making money at that, or making a living, I should say.
Yeah.
So we're about 3,000. We're not much bigger than average, but we've taken about a quarter then. So I know it sounds big if you're.
No, I just think it's hilarious that, yeah. All right, so you told me a while back that you had a meeting with Bobby Kennedy and Brooke Rollins, and so Secretary of Health and Human Services and the Secretary of Agriculture, and this wasn't a 3-minute meeting, this was a 2-hour meeting. So, and what was the point of that meeting? Were you there to get something for yourself? Were you there to promote Quinn Institute?
Well, actually, I was invited. So I didn't initiate this. So I was minding my own business up early in the morning, as I usually am, and looking at my text messages and emails. And here was a text message, and it said, "Good morning, Bob." He said, "This is Brooke Rollins. I'm reading your book, and I want to talk to you." So I just immediately typed back, with just a snap response. I said, "Oh, I'm glad you like it, and I'd be happy to talk anytime." And then I thought to myself, Brooke Rollins, that sounds so familiar. Who is that? And I typed it on my computer. I said, "Oh my gosh, that's the Secretary of Agriculture." And I had forgotten, it was early in the morning. I was just out of bed. And I had forgotten the governor of Montana is actually good friends of hers. And he had asked me for a copy of my book, of one of my books, Grain by Grain. And I had signed it for her and put in a card and a business card. That's how she got my number, and gave it to him, or left it in the office. I didn't even see him in January or February. And I'd forgotten all about that. And here she had finally got it and was actually reading it, that's even more amazing. And she was interested in it and wanted to talk to me. And so then when I found that out, then I wrote a more appropriate response, considering who she was. And I said, "I'd be glad to meet with you. I'm going to be back at Rodale in Pennsylvania in a few weeks. And, it's right in your neighborhood." That's how we look at it. It's compared to where we are. I said, "I'd be glad to come and talk to you." And so she said, "Okay, well, my people will be in touch." And well, a couple of weeks went by and nobody was in touch. And so I texted her again, and because she usually answered then when I would send her stuff. And I said, "I haven't heard from any of your people." "Oh, I'll check. And I'm sure it slipped through the cracks. And so now we're only a week away from this Thursday when we're supposed to meet. I'm sure she's completely booked full. Probably. I don't know. I'm supposing this. Because she wrote back then a few minutes later and she said, "How would you like to meet at the Naval Mess in the White House? And I'll invite Bobby Kennedy to join us." And I thought, wow. I think I can rearrange my schedule for that. I didn't say it that way, but because I was planning to leave that day, and I immediately canceled that airplane ticket and got a new one. And I said, "I'd be happy to do that. That sounds amazing." And then she wrote back in a few minutes. She said, "Well, Bobby's in. He'll be there." And so I was at the White House at a little after 7 in the morning on Friday, the 13th of June. And it happened to be the day after Israel attacked Iran. So the president was having a cabinet meeting that morning in the White House, and that's probably another reason she suggested, and it was really easy for her to just go to the next meeting. But he canceled the cabinet meeting. So now here's two secretaries with a meeting that's been canceled with a very open schedule. So we had a very leisurely breakfast. She asked lots and lots of questions about my book. And, her background is she was raised on a farm, but she hasn't worked in agriculture for her professional life. But she has a farm background. So she was asking, lots of farm-related questions, and she was quite interested in what we had done and what our farm had changed over the last 4 decades. And she's very, very, very engaging. And Bobby Kennedy, he knows all this stuff already, and he's really, believing it and preaching it and encouraging organic and all this stuff. He didn't really ask her any questions as much as she did, but he would pipe in and had a few things that we talked about. Most of the discussion was at a really high level. I wanted to talk to him about the future of food, and how we can really change that in America, and the research is needed to do that. And I offered to be of help of any way I could from my experiences, which I'm not a politician. I'm not really an expert in all this, but I've had enough experience in agriculture that if they want to know how we could move the needle in a certain way, which to me, a positive way is the way we're going in away from chemicals and into organic and natural, and then with the definition, alternative. Anyway, I offered my whatever help I could be, and that's kind of how it stayed. And then after breakfast, they had time to take me on a tour of the Rose Garden, which is all dug up, and took some nice pictures at the back of the White House, which I just seen on TV, in the past. It was very, very pleasant, and it was quite an amazing experience to me. Something I never imagined. I would never imagine asking for such a privilege or thing, and having a hope to be acknowledged. I was in Washington last February or something, and I contacted Secretary Kennedy's office and I said I'm not asking to meet with him, but if there's any of the under secretaries or anybody I can meet with to tell a little about what we're doing with our aspects of food as medicine, or food, growing food as medicine, I would be happy to do so. And I got kind of a canned response back saying, "Oh, thank you for your interest. The secretary is very busy, blah, blah, blah." And even though I hadn't even asked to meet with the secretary, I'd asked to meet with somebody in his office to share our experiences. So this was so different. It was sort of like out of the bureaucratic loop. That's how I felt.
Yeah.
It was a complete unconventional type, really a wonderful experience, just an exchange of information, exchange of minds. I was very encouraged with her interest. And she said, and I said, I can't tell you how excited I am to be at the same table with Secretary of Health and Education and Human Services and Agriculture, because I think that those two working in combination and in harmony can solve the problems that either one by yourself cannot do in isolation. And she said to me, "Oh, we're starting to meet more and more." And I took that as a very positive thing. So anyway, I came back quite encouraged with what I've heard and in my experience on that.
Yeah. Well, that's great, Bob. And, you're the right guy for that job. They wouldn't enjoy meeting with me. And, but and I
didn't ask any embarrassing questions.
Yeah, I couldn't help myself. I'd have a lot of embarrassing things to say.
That's fair. That's
yeah,
all right.
Yeah, that's right. But it's great that you did that. It's great that they got to hear you for a couple of hours talking about the best of organic and where it could go and where it should go. And I applaud that you had that meeting. You told me that you then went on and showed up on a panel. Were they? Yeah. They were both there, right?
Yes. So I got a call. So now we're in the middle of harvest. So this is July. And I got a call from Kennedy's office, and they said, "We're having a roundtable. We're having a Senate roundtable a week from today in the Capitol. That's hosted by Senator I'm thinking flipping his name, Bingham, I think, and from Kansas.
Yeah.
Should look that up.
Yeah.
Anyway. Is it Bingham?
I don't remember the name. I remember he was from Kansas.
It starts with B. I should know. Anyway, and he's the chairman of the Mohawk Senate Committee.
Yeah.
And he had invited a lot of his Kansas friends to come, and they wanted to be sure that they had an organic voice. And then they asked me for a recommendation of an organic farmer from Kansas. And of course, it's the middle part. Even in Kansas, it's a really busy time. Even though they're early, most of their harvest is done of their wheat and everything. It's a busy time, and it took me all day, but I finally found a dozen phone calls. But I found somebody that could they could come and join me from Kansas, and that's we ended up with 10 people on the panel. We were told, and we were asked for our script ahead of time. We were given 3 minutes each to introduce ourselves, and then they wanted 30 minutes for introductions of 10 people, and then 30 minutes of questions and answers that would be coming from the two secretaries, the Secretary of Agriculture and Secretary Kennedy, that was supposed to be there. And so that's what we were told to prepare for. And the secretary showed up. They made opening statements, and the press was excused. We were told so that the participants could feel free to say whatever they wanted to say without worried about being quoted in the press and all that kind of stuff. But anyway, that's what happened. And then the senator then, who was running the meeting, took quite a while to introduce his friends from Kansas, and made remarks after they spoke. First of all, the senators spoke, and the two secretaries spoke. That took 15 minutes, and then the introductions and the 3 minutes we were supposed to have. Some of them were more than that. We were down to the last 10 minutes of the hour, and there were 4 of us left to speak, and 2 of those 4 were the organic farmers. So they quickly kind of passed notes to us and said, please cut your 3-minute remarks in half. And then they turned to the Secretary of Agriculture and said, I know now, Madam Secretary, that you need to leave right at 10 o'clock. And because it went from 9 to 10. And she said, oh no, I'll stay till I can hear everybody speak. And so she stayed, and then we got to give our piece. And I just said, and there were some that said on their day, well, organic won't work. We had one researcher from Georgia. He said, well, in my research, I can show you and tell you that organic won't work. And so I just simply said, I've been organic for 40 years now, and it's not only working for me, it's saved our farm from bankruptcy, which is many of our neighbors went through with the high cost of producing cheap food. And I said, my story has been replicated in every state of this country. And all you have to do is find those people and have them help share their experiences with those who would like to know how to do it. And this is the future. I said, there's no future in chemical agriculture that's making people sick. And that's about all I said. Anyway, so I was a little bit frustrated, Dave, about the whole thing, except to say that to even be at the table was huge. Because in the past, and you know this very well, we're very rarely invited to the table. And to be invited to the table is huge. Even if we were short-circuited a little bit on presentation, we were still there. And we got to say our piece at whatever level it was. I thought that was a huge step forward. So anyway, you have to be thankful for the positive things, not be frustrated over the things that didn't quite go the way you thought.
Yeah. You and I met with Vilsack.
Yes.
Yeah. Secretary Vilsack. We had about an hour, I think. And
yes, and that was another one that was supposed to be 20 minutes. And I remember his assistant coming in, or whoever, some of the staff people, saying, your next meeting is about ready to start. And he kind of brushed me off. I said, okay, just tell them we'll be right there. And I'm sure they probably do that if they need to have an excuse to cut it off. They can cut it off, right? But he actually took time to listen to us in great detail, like a whole hour, like you said. I was very encouraged with that. The activity that came from all that, I don't know how much that really flushed out to activity, but at least we're starting to be heard, Dave. I think that's the difference now. We're starting to be heard at different levels, at many different levels. It's still going to take a while for the action to come, but we're starting to be heard. I think that's what we can say now.
Yeah. I love you told me that your name plaque on that panel was Bob Quinn, Real Organic Project. So
I know. Did you have something to do with that?
I just pulled some
How much
strings,
did
Bob.
that cost you? What's that cost you, Dave?
A round of golf, yeah, right. No, that was great.
Yeah, and I listed the different associations that I have, and of course the Real Organic is one of them. But they didn't ask me what to put on there. I listed the Quinn Institute as the first one. I thought they put that on, but who knows what that is. So I thought that was a good compliment to you and the whole organization that's what they put on there, because that's maybe what they thought would be most significant. I don't know.
Yeah.
They didn't ask me, but I thought that was kind of fun.
Yeah. Well, God bless you, Bob, for working at this. I have lots of friends who spend a lot of their time trying to influence the government. And I don't think it's a fool's errand, but it's not where I can quite stand to put all my energy.
Yeah.
We've put our energy on basically trying to create a big enough movement that government will have to listen. And I just
they don't really lead. They don't really lead, Dave. My opinion, as much as they follow.
Yeah.
But there's got to be a core. Has to be a core critical mass, let's say, that they can follow.
That's right.
That's how I see it, and that's kind of what you're saying too.
That's right. All right, Bob. We're probably at time here. As I say, yeah, we could go for another couple hours, but so Bob Quinn, thank you very much. It's always really interesting to talk with you, and I mean that. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Real Organic Podcast. If you have a spare minute today, the single most effective way you can help us grow this movement and others to find this podcast is by leaving us a rating and a review wherever you listen to our podcast. You can find a video version of this interview on our website or on our YouTube channel, and you can join us every Sunday for a new episode featuring voices from the organic movement. And if you haven't already, please sign up for our weekly newsletter at realorganicproject.org/email. See you next time.